Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Draft Series. Today we're going to be talking about Joe Fagano, quarterback out of UConn, formerly a transfer from Maine. Fagano was at UConn for 3 years before making it to the NFL, and he had a very productive career. Another guy similar to Altmaier, who we talked about previously, that took his school to heights that they hadn't been to in a while. UConn won 9 games this past year, which is a great season for them. Had some wins against real ACC teams, and Fagano and his receiver Skylar Bell were a dynamic duo for the Huskies in this past season. Fagano is 6'3", 226 pounds. He's an older quarterback. He's born in 2001, so a guy that played a ton in college before eventually getting the chance to make it to the next level. He is a fairly prototypical guy. When you watch him and you watch a few throws, you think, okay, like I see the level of talent here that would be necessary for a guy to become an NFL quarterback. And I think Fagano's biggest strength is his overall aggressive mindset and vision. He is a really instinctive player, and I think especially later in the down, on throws down the field, really sees the field well and understands where his ball needs to be placed in order for a defender to not be able to make a play on it. You'll see him take a lot of chances, but statistically, he really hasn't paid much of a penalty for that throughout his collegiate career. This past year in 2025, he had 28 passing touchdowns to 1 interception. So a guy that understands the risk-reward game pretty well. I will say there's times when you watch him on tape that it's hard to understand how he only threw 1 interception. Like, there's some over-aggressiveness on his tape that I think he'll pay for at the next level. But overall, understands that part of the game really well. The thing that stands out to me the most about that is his understanding of leverage. So he's as good as almost anybody that you'll watch at understanding where the defender is positioned relative to the receiver, and then allowing the receiver to be able to make a play on a ball without having to go through the defender to do that. He pairs this with a good understanding of the sideline as well, where he has a lot of throws where he makes sure that if he's going to throw a contested pass, it's either his receiver's going to have the chance to make a play on it, or it's just going to go out of bounds and it's going to go incomplete. So overall, a fun watch from that perspective, and especially late in the down, we'll see some windows that most guys just don't really find. Fagano does have a pretty good arm. I think you see him throw with touch, and he's able to kind of take it off, 100 miles an hour when he's throwing short throws. He has pretty good arm strength, though. I think he throws some line drives that are pretty impressive. It's not some super great arm, but it's enough to be an NFL caliber quarterback. And he's able to place the ball in the intermediate part of the field while really getting his full body into a throw. Overall, he's a pretty shifty runner, and I would describe him as a twitchy player in general. Kind of the opposite of Altmaier, actually. Altmaier's a guy that I thought was pretty good in the open field as a runner, and probably a faster runner than Fagano. But I think Fagano, with his size and overall twitch, he does a lot better escaping the pocket and can make guys miss in the open field, even if he's not going to reach that top speed. He's also just a tough player and uses his size pretty well to keep plays alive when the defense is trying to make a sack or force him out of bounds before he's diving for the goal line. Those types of plays he's able to handle pretty well for their offense. So overall, a good bit to like about Fagano. On the bad side, to start off, he's really old. I mean, you just have a hard time thinking that there's much more you're going to get out of him. He's one of the only quarterbacks in this class who is older than I am. So there probably will be, I don't know if there'll be anybody that's older than me next year, but he is one of the only quarterbacks in this class where that is the case, which is not a good sign for him. He also has a really long throwing motion, and you see this actually hurt him on his tape. So I think on shorter throws, you will see times where he kind of simplifies it and kind of just flicks it out there to make sure he has enough time to get a throw off. There are other times, though, where he does need to get enough arm strength on the ball, where his throwing motion is just too long. It results in batted balls, both from the perspective of, the motion isn't some super over-the-top motion. He's not super tall. but also it allows defenders to have more time to react to where the throw is going to be. And there are times where you'll see guys anticipate the throw he's going to make and actually have time to get there because of the length of the throwing motion. But like I said, he does have the ability to get off of this, especially for the short game. So it's not something that completely plagues him, but you see it pop up on tape enough where it is a concern. He also does, while he is an aggressive player, and I love his vision and understanding of leverage, he does get antsy if he's in the pocket for a while. He doesn't always play as mature as you would like him to for a guy that is his age. And he will force throws. If he thinks there is a shot to make a play late in the down and it has some risk associated with it, there are times where he just, when you play the style he does, you're going to make mistakes. And while he does a pretty good job statistically in college of not paying that penalty, there are times where he forces throws that would be better off for him to just throw away or try to make a play with his legs. The last concern I do have with Fagano is I think his accuracy is inconsistent. There are some shorter throws that he just misses terribly. There are times where he tries to put more velocity on the ball and it gets away from him. So overall, I think he does have a pretty good arm, but it's not a guy who's got like a mid-tier arm with perfect accuracy. It's more of a guy with a mid-tier NFL arm with okay accuracy, right? So it's not a plus arm from that perspective, but it is probably satisfactory for what you're looking for from an NFL backup. All right, let's get into some of the clips here with Fagano and start to explore, some other parts of his game that you can see through the tape. A lot of this are things we probably already talked about, but let's put some specific examples to a lot of these traits. So this first play against Syracuse, I think, is a good example of his aggressive mindset. You'll see here, first of all, they run a little bootleg, and Syracuse gets pressure immediately, right? They're immediately trying to make a play, but Fagano's able to use his strength and shakes off this defender. And once he does that, not only is he able to prevent this from being a sack, but he's actually able to turn this into a positive play. So he keeps his eyes downfield, identifies the open receiver, keeps him from getting knocked out by the corner as well, and makes a good throw to pick up positive yardage. This is a good example of a few of his traits here. You see the toughness, you see the strength, you see the ability to keep his eyes downfield and make a throw on the run. This is a pretty typical play that you'll see from him. All right, next clip here. This is an example of some of the accuracy inconsistencies that you see. I think here he makes the exact right read. His pocket presence is good. So you'll see he drops back, waits for the guy to break. Probably throws this a little bit late, probably sits a little bit too long on this. But the big problem here, he understands where this ball needs to be. He just doesn't hit it. And I do think sometimes you see that be a problem for him. Here, he gets pushed back a little bit. I wonder if his throwing motion was impacted by the right tackle getting pushed back into his lap a little bit, and that leads to some inaccuracy, but you do see that pop up on his tape. All right, this next play against Syracuse, I think, is a good example of his late down vision. So again, another bootleg throw. You don't really like what you have here. He probably could rip this if he identified this earlier. He probably could just hit Skylar Bell here on this, 12-yard out. That's probably the throw you want him to make here. So you wouldn't be grading this out as a complete positive for him. Like, I don't really know why he doesn't attempt this throw, to be honest. He's usually pretty good about this on his tape. But what he does do here is keep his eyes downfield and make a really creative throw back to the tight end once he realizes that all of these defensive linemen are pursuing him. The tight end ends up dropping the ball here because it's just kind of an awkward angle. But this is the kind of stuff on his tape that you see that's just pretty creative and allows him to almost turn what would be a negative play on tape into a huge positive if his tight end could just make the catch. All right, so a little bit of good and bad there. And now let's look at this last clip against Boston College. This, again, I think shows off a little more of the arm talent and especially points out his understanding of leverage. Again, this play is going to fall incomplete, but this is, I think, a good example of his comfortability within the offense. So this guy's basically running like a post corner. He's going to fake breaking in and then break back outside. This is Bell again, who's an NFL caliber player, by the way, so they had a lot of success with each other. Fagano here breaks and realizes, I'm not going to have very much time to get this off, but I know my receiver is going to win here. I've got the matchup I want. Does a really good job of getting that throw off before the defense comes to make a play. throws a moon ball up into the end zone. There's some contact here on the end of this play that prevents Bell from ending up making the catch. But I think this is exactly what you want to see from Fagano on this play. Understands what's happening, sets his feet, gets the throw off, 50 yards plus in the air, rainbow perfectly to his best receiver, and puts it only where his guy can go to get it. That's exactly what you're looking for on this type of play, even if the results aren't exactly what he wanted. So overall, Fagano's a pretty fun watch. You do see enough on his tape to think, okay, like I see why someone could talk themselves into him. Let's go to comps, and then I'll finish with my grade here. Again, we'll kind of round up landing spots here. Obviously, as a Ravens fan, have no problem with the Ravens signing him as a UDFA. I think that makes perfect sense for them, but we'll get into landing spots a little bit more in a future show. So I'll stick here with kind of just my grade for Fagano and some comps for him. Best case for him, I struggled with comps for him. I think there are ways where he could become a pretty good backup if he can just fix a little bit of the accuracy inconsistencies in the decision making, but I don't know that I feel good about those things coming together to really put his best case much higher than, the 30th best quarterback in the league. So my best case for him I put was Spencer Rattler. Not necessarily like if Spencer Rattler were to reach his ceiling, but just kind of what you see from Spencer Rattler right now. A guy that does see the field pretty well at times, is an aggressive thrower, has some high-end flashes, but is pretty inconsistent. Rattler certainly has a better arm than him, but I think it's that type of player that we're talking about here. Worst case, I put Devin Leary, who was actually another guy the Ravens drafted, which I really didn't even think about until just now, but Leary is another guy that had a pretty good arm, pretty good tools, but was just an inconsistent college player that I didn't like Leary very much as a prospect, and I think the Ravens picking up 2 quarterbacks this year indicates that they don't really have high expectations for him at this point either. So Leary would be a worst case, a guy that, if it were to not work out for Fagano, you could see that happening. All right, let's conclude with my grade for Fagano. So I have a 6th round grade on him. I think I enjoyed watching him more than probably some other late round guys, just because you do see some of the flashes of like really good playmaking and good instincts, relatively strong arm. But there are enough inconsistencies in his game along with the age where I just have a hard time seeing it all come together to the point where you're willing to take like a really high upside bet on him any earlier than the late round. I think you're really hoping here that this turns into like a pretty solid backup, and I think in the 6th round, like that's perfectly reasonable. So I have a 6th round grade on Fagano. He did go undrafted, so I think that's pretty good value for the Ravens to get him at that point. But that does it for the Fagano breakdown today. So stay tuned. We'll have a few more of these individual breakdowns coming out over the next week or so. And following that, we'll try to put a bow on this overall QB class.